Hello all, and thank you for joining me. My name is John Trougakos, and I'm a professor of management at the University of Toronto. I'm also a part of the Staples Work From Anywhere Advisory Council. Today, my presentation is titled Hybrid Now What? Keys to Adjusting to the Hybrid Work Model. I'm going to cover a lot of ground today. And I want to point out right up front that each of the topics I'm going to cover, each of the main topics, could be a half an hour, 45-minute, hour-long session just on their own. So I'm going to give some high-level points and a little bit of detail to get you thinking about some of the critical things that you really need to think about in implementing your work from anywhere, your hybrid models, your models of the future. Today, I'm going to cover the changing landscape of work and share some data and what that means and what the workplace is evolving into. We'll then talk about how do we get people on board. And really, this is a big change management challenge. And so one of the key things that we have to think about is how do we follow best practices for change management to make sure that this initiative is as successful as any other change management initiative we might initiate. We'll also talk about successful hybrid teams and some key tips to help teams working from a hybrid model be successful and stay cohesive and connected. Then we'll talk about the role of leaders and leadership in hybrid work models. And we'll also talk about not just the way leaders can maximize the success of their hybrid work teams, but also the pitfalls that they need to watch out and avoid. Finally, we'll wrap up by talking about workplace well-being and really address one of the key issues we've experienced through the pandemic is the second pandemic, and that's the burnout pandemic. And we'll talk about some of the causes as well as some potential remedies to that as well. So obviously, since the COVID pandemic, there has been a sea shift in the way in which companies have done business. And most people working in offices have experienced some impact. People were forced to go and work remotely, a large number of people. And then, of course, now we're in the phase where things are kind of back and forth. And companies are figuring out, well, how do we want to do this? How can we leverage the best of both worlds? What does the data tell us? This is across surveys from the beginning of the pandemic up until recent weeks here. What we know is that 70% of employees prefer hybrid when they're surveyed. So this is not surprising that a lot of companies are looking to hybrid models. We also know that 15% of people approximately prefer working in the office, and another 15% of people prefer working fully remotely. And if we break that down even further, what we see are discrepancies in preferences between men and women, whereas men are a little more likely to prefer going into the office compared to women, as well as older versus younger workers, where older workers, again, prefer going into the office somewhat more than younger workers do. What we know from an organizational perspective is that 50 to 70% of companies either are currently hybrid or they will be hybrid going into the next year or two. So this is really an important topic, and how companies can utilize hybrid work models to be successful is something that virtually every company, even if they're not fully adopting hybrid, needs to think about as a potential option, or at least in terms of how their competitors are going to be responding to the new work environment. Some advantages of hybrid work. One, we know that performance did not decrease when employees went remote. And in fact, there are many instances where we saw increases in productivity. So there are potential avenues to enhance employee effectiveness. We also know that the hybrid models give an opportunity for employees to improve their well-being by giving them opportunities to have autonomy and flexibility in their work and to be able to balance their life as they so choose and work in ways that are more conducive to their own personal health. Building on this idea of flexibility, it gives flexibility to employees, but also to organizations as to the way in which work can get done now. There's also major advantages from recruiting and being attractive to employees who are looking for different ways of working. And many employees, quite frankly, as we can tell by the survey results, they expect hybrid models as being something that they would want to do and that companies would offer. It lets us leverage our talent in the sense that people can work in ways that make them most effective. And really you can maximize people's ability to work when they're most efficient, when they're most effective, and in ways that are going to pay off for the organization in the long run. And of course, all of this can be utilized as a strategic advantage by the organization. On the downside, we know that there are some coordination issues that companies have to work out, especially in the early going, where the roles may not be as clear, and how people are going to stay connected isn't as obvious necessarily without guidance. So this is something companies have to work through. That level of coordination is absolutely critical. Also, keeping people connected, both in terms of work as well as interpersonally with one another and with the organization and the culture of organization. This is something that requires a little bit of work by organizations as well. Some research shows that certain types of employees are demotivated when their work is less structured. So when they work in hybrid work environments, which may be a little less structured for employees, there are some people who need that structure and as a result are just a little bit less motivated to do their job. Of course, there are issues with boundaries. Where does work stop and end? We're in people's homes on video meetings, etc. How do we draw those boundaries? How do we keep those healthy boundaries and let people enjoy the best of both worlds? And then there are different viewpoints. What does hybrid mean to different people? Different people want to come into the office more. Other people want to work remotely more. How do we calibrate ourselves as organizations and as teams and as leaders as to these different viewpoints in order to find a perspective that's going to work for everybody? And again, not doing so is a major problem that companies have to overcome. So in implementing hybrid models, what we have to think about is how do we get people on board? And really, if we think about this, we've been in a big change initiative for the past 2 years almost now. And things have been forced upon organizations beyond their control, and they've adapted, and in most cases successfully adapted to keep businesses going with employees working remotely, and now trying to bring them back in the office. But really, if we think about it, we are really just in an ongoing change management initiative. And so how do we effectively manage change? Well, the principles that work beyond COVID, in non-COVID times, these will work now and they will work going into the future. First of all, of course, we need a strong plan. I see a lot of companies that I've worked with don't have a clear plan on what their hybrid model looks like or where their hybrid model is going. They just kind of say, okay, we're going to give people some choices to where they're going to work and let's go for it. And that tends to lead to some sort of confusion and really doesn't maximize the ability of people to be successful in the hybrid model. Good companies have a good plan. It's clear. It's of course going to be flexible and changeable, but at the same time, they have a roadmap for where they're going, so they know and their people know what the initiative is about and how they're going to get there. Also, getting employees involved is really important to make any change successful, and especially change like this, which really is so critical to how employees work in their day-to-day functioning at work. We know that when employees get involved, and we not just get them involved, but we actually incorporate their input, that people, one, feel the process is more fair because they've had a voice, and two, they're much more committed to the plan because now they have a stake in it, now they have a say, and they feel some ownership over it. So really, it's important to get that input. And of course, you're going to get different perspectives from different parts of the organization that maybe you might not think about. And so that is really important to make these initiatives successful. Part of this is having an ongoing hybrid working committee, people that can bring input from different parts of the organization, especially as we're living in our hybrid work environments and working in them and seeing what's working, what's not working, so that changes can be made. And also champions that can go out there and promote and communicate what the organization is doing and the benefits of why they're doing it. Of course, this leads to communication. Absolutely critical to be able to tell your people what to expect and also remind them that we're in a position where we need to adapt, right? Things are not going to just go from point A to point B in a perfectly straight, smooth line, that there is going to be times of uncertainty. There's going to be times where we have to change course a little bit, but nonetheless, being able to communicate what those changes are, being able to communicate what to expect is really important to getting people on board. Of course, any change initiative has to start at the top. Management has to support it. If employees don't feel that management is supportive of it, it's not going to work. So managers really have to buy in and be strong in their support for the plan. We want to set people up for success, and typically this means providing them resources, but not just material resources. They could need the technologies, they could need different kinds of material support, but also the personal support, the social support that is critical to get people through any kind of change management initiative, to answer their questions, to be there to guide them through new work processes, etc. Of course, as with any change initiative, we want to monitor how it's going, see where there are parts where it's not going as we would necessarily desire, and be able to adjust and be able to keep the change moving in a positive direction so it doesn't break down somewhere along the way. And of course, lastly, we really want to be understanding. Change is stressful, without a doubt. But change during the pandemic is doubly stressful. We've been inundated with so much upheaval in our society, and workers have been through quite a bit in the last 2 years. So keep in mind that the process itself of any change is stressful, but really when you're changing the day-to-day ways that people are living on top of, and the way they're working on top of the way that they've lived their life for the last couple of years, that really stress is a major factor here that we need to be aware of and manage effectively for employees. Of course, being flexible is absolutely important as to how we can be successful in doing this. And being ready for the unexpected. And by being flexible, you really are ready for the unexpected and can adapt to it. The first thing I want to say is stop making grand proclamations here. There just isn't an advantage to doing this anymore. I mean, we've had companies say, okay, in the summer, it's the big reopening, back to office. In the fall, the big back to office. January, new year, back to work again. Well, as we've seen, we just can't really predict what's going to happen. And these false starts are somewhat demoralizing and discouraging for employees. Makes them feel like, oh, we got worked up and we put all this effort and time in preparing and now it didn't happen. The best thing to do is just set your plan, get people on board and start it. When it's ready, just get it rolling, adjust as it comes up, and make sure you're flexible as you move forward with the plan. Be ready for conflicts and frictions. Not everybody is going to get along. Not everybody is going to agree. As we move through different processes, we're going to have to figure out what works, what doesn't work. And so those conflicts and frictions are going to need to be addressed and managed as companies move forward with their hybrid models. Of course, not everybody will be happy, but they really weren't all happy before either. So you can only do so much. What you need to do is adjust where you can to accommodate different people's productivity and happiness, of course, within reason. And beyond that, be fair, be consistent, and again, have that opportunity for people to have a say and get people on board and move the plan forward. And of course, know when to adjust your plan. If things aren't working, people might not be happy on a larger scale for a reason. And so know what's happening, know when to adjust and when you might need to adapt or pivot your plan in some way. The best way to do that is to be able to capture data, use that data to make your adjustments and to adapt your plan. We start off with we look at 3 important types of metrics: performance metrics, employee metrics, and work patterns that we need to be continually capturing. We want to make sure our performance metrics are valid and reliable, and that really goes for any metric, but it really especially important in performance. You want it to actually predict that outcome that you're looking for and also be repeatable. Capture both outcomes and processes. This is important because a lot of times we focus on outcomes, whether it's sales or productivity or safety or whatever it might be, and we lose some of the ability to capture processes along the way. We don't focus on that. As a result, when we don't get the outcomes we want, we can't see the processes that led to that. We don't have the measurement of the processes that led to that to be able to tell us what went wrong and how we can actually fix it. So it's important to capture both. Also, capture objective and subjective measures. And this might sound odd because people, usually think objective measures are the end all be all gold standard, and typically they are. But don't forget that people's thoughts, feelings, and opinions really matter in this process. And so being able to get some more subjective things that maybe you cannot quantify will provide some insights that are important as well. Of course, every organization should have different metrics, and even different work teams will have different metrics. So again, have to evaluate what works for each organization and each work group. From an employee perspective, we want to get things like job satisfaction, commitment to the organization, the social support they receive both from the organization and their leaders, as well as their colleagues. We want to capture employee motivation and employee fairness perceptions. These are really good indicators of how people will perform in the future and gives you a good idea of how effective your policies are and how they're being received by your people. And of course, employee well-being. This is something that we'll talk about a little bit later in the presentation, but employees that aren't healthy are not going to perform their job the way they're capable of. And then lastly, we want to capture working patterns. We want to see how people are working, where they're working from, when they're working. This is really important in the hybrid model to be able to capture these things because it's a new way of working. And we want to see where we are getting hangups in the work process, where people might be getting frustrations, where there are bottlenecks, right? Where our workflow is kind of hitting roadblocks. And so being able to identify where these bottlenecks are, seeing where these frustrations are critical to fix them. But also it's important to see how effectively are people using the hybrid tools available to them. And so we want to really capture these work patterns. So what about hybrid teams? This has been a big concern throughout the pandemic as people have worked remotely and organizations wonder, how can we keep our teams together? How can we keep them working creatively and effectively and connected to one another? Really, this is a process. The hybrid model is a process of balancing autonomy and connectedness. Sure, we want to give our people the freedom to choose how they work, where they work from. That is great for employees' motivation. That is great for employees' health. That is great for employees' productivity. But also, we've got to keep our people connected. And so finding out where we can manage this is absolutely vital. What we want to do is focus on inclusiveness. Now, we don't want to get into the us versus them debate within work teams. This is important because what can happen? There might be, let's say you have 10 employees on a team and 5 of them typically come into the office regularly and 5 of them more regularly work remotely. And what happens? They start looking at themselves as subgroups within your team and almost get an adversarial mentality towards one another. So we want to avoid that. We want to keep people connected, keep people inclusive. Don't let those subgroups form based around the modes in which people are working. Also, we want to avoid the situation where people become out of sight and out of mind within teams. So again, take the example of 10 people on a team. If 1 or 2 people works a little bit of a different style than the other people on the team, they might get left out. They might get left out in the online chats. They might get left out if the team is mostly in the office. They might get left out of the conversations that are going on and the information that's being passed around. So make sure that those people aren't forgotten and that they're included in what's going on with the team. Really critical, and we kind of touched on this in the previous slide, but identify how people are working and identify interdependent workflows and tasks within teams. This should be an ongoing process. We want to see who works with who, what part of the project connects from one person to the next. How do we manage that? If we can identify all the parts of the work that kind of connect, where somebody needs to work with someone else, it lets managers, it lets teams be able to more effectively plan the work and determine when people have to be in the office versus they can be out of the office, or how people are going to get the job done. So really spend time to figure out how people's jobs are connected, the way each work piece is connected, and how the work flows to the outcomes that you're wanting. Office space configurations. A lot of companies are reconfiguring their offices thinking, okay, we're going to make these office spaces that are very team focused and collaborative now that people can work hybrid. And maybe they forget about some people are coming into work regular and they want a quiet space to work. Or someone's coming in for a team meeting and it's not worth it for them to drive back home until the end of the workday. So they're going to sit in the office and work, and they need somewhere to work. But think about, where's their space? What does that space look like? Encourage the team togetherness of working in these workspaces, but also think about different ways that people are going to work so that you're keeping everybody productive and included in the team. Set communication rules, really important here. Understand what channels of communication are going to be used. Is it going to be things like email? Is it going to be Teams, Zoom, Slack, whatever medium is going to be used, and have rules for them. Are we going to communicate what type of information, when and how to each other? Making sure we don't bleed our work time communications into personal times, either before or after work if possible. So have clear rules and let people know what they are so they stick to them and they feel comfortable communicating within that framework and there's not that ambiguity. In terms of meetings, critical form of team communication, be clear what the mediums are going to be. Are people coming in the office? When? Are they going to do remote meetings? What channels are they going to be used? Will cameras be allowed to be on or off? Sometimes a telephone meeting is just as good as a Zoom meeting. Also, make sure that people understand if there's going to be a hybrid type of meeting. Well, how does that work? What are the rules for that? How do we make sure everyone's voice is heard? Thinking about times too. You might not want to set every meeting early in the morning because different people have different ways of working. And so think about what the best times are for each team. I suggest having two types of meeting: task-focused meetings and team-building meetings. The task meetings should be straight to the point, very business-like. The objective is getting the business part of the job done. On the other side, the team-building meetings, good to have separate meetings for this so you don't have overly long meetings, but have meetings where people can connect, talk to each other, share issues, share concerns, and bond with each other, and keep that team cohesiveness going and that creativity going. Of course, it's always good to keep meetings short. Not too many meetings require to go 2 or 3 hours. We've all been in those ones where it's like, well, this is totally unnecessary. So think about the timing of your meetings, how long they are. And you don't have to have an in-office meeting every week. 1 week can be in person, 1 week can be remote. Mix it up, figure out what works for people and have that flexibility. Of course, watch out for stress and anxiety that people are feeling. If we're not around our teammates every day, there might be trigger points that we're missing. There might be issues that are coming up that we're missing. Maybe their behavior seems a little bit different than usual. Why would that be? Well, we might see that, we might not, but keep in mind that there are issues that people that are on our teams might be dealing with that are causing stress and anxiety. How can we help support them through those times? How about leaders? Well, first of all, leaders have to have a vision. This really is a transformation process. You're transforming the way that people are working. And so as a leader, you've got to be the one to set the tone, have the vision, give the direction for where your employees are going. Part of this is being that example yourself. If you're promoting the hybrid model and your company is really all in on this, but you're in the office every single day, your team members are going to see this and they're going to say, well, the boss is in every day, we better be in every day. And it's going to defeat the purpose of the hybrid model. So live the model, be the example. Also, really important to be a facilitator. Of course, the importance of goals doesn't change when it comes to hybrid teams. Really set those SMART goals. Decades of research show how critical goal setting is and the effectiveness it has on individual and team performance. But as a leader, your role goes a step beyond that. Your role also is to remove obstacles. So remove obstacles from employees' path, whether it's making sure they have the social support, the resources they need, the connections with their teammates that they need, or suppliers or customers, or whatever it might be. Be the obstacle remover and let them have success, facilitate their success. Also, be sure to provide timely feedback, especially in hybrid models where people are sometimes remote, sometimes in the office. As a supervisor, you may not have as frequent or as direct contact with people as you would like every day as a result. And part of that is it's up to you to make that contact happen, whether it's even a telephone call or emails, but also to make sure that you're not letting those feedback opportunities slide and you're keeping the feedback timely for your employees so they can know what their progress is like on their goals, where they need to adjust, and really gauge their ability to be successful and facilitate their success in the long run. Lastly, show you care. Develop and maintain high quality exchange relationship with your employees, that give and take, the interpersonal part as well as the work support part. And then it's really important to ask questions and listen. Don't have to put your opinions on your employees continually, but get that, give them a couple of questions, listen, then ask more questions and listen again. There's research that shows that really people who ask 3 meaningful questions and just listen to the answers they're getting about a topic to somebody, they're liked a lot more by the people they interact with and they're respected more. So ultimately, that's part of being a good leader and getting your employees on board with you. Some of the pitfalls that leaders can fall into. We have a bias problem. People are always biased, right? But 3 biases that I think are especially relevant for hybrid models are, first, the confirmation bias. And this is where we have a certain perspective and we only seek out information that confirms our point of view. If you're somebody who, for example, thinks, oh, it's better to be in the office, well, every little hiccup in the hybrid process, you're gonna see as confirmation that you were right, that hybrid's not gonna work, and and people should be in the office. And you're likely to ignore data that might be saying, for example, well, employees are 50% more satisfied and 25% more productive. Well, you're going to focus on those couple of times that employees were having communication or coordination issues and see, I was right. So watch out for that communication bias and avoid it. Consensus bias. This is where we think everybody thinks the same way that we do and that there's consensus on an issue. Again, you might think hybrid's the best model that exists and everybody must love hybrid and we're so excited to do this and it's great. But you'll have employees that don't agree with that, especially in the early phases of implementation. And so if you make that assumption that everyone just has consensus, you're going to miss key points where you can help people in the transition, and really being aware of the fact and being open to the fact that different people are going to have different perspectives and you have to be ready to address those. The last bias to consider here that I'm going to talk about today is the similar to me bias. This is where we tend to like people better, not surprisingly, that we see as similar to ourselves. And you might think, okay, that seems regular. I mean, most people are kind of like that. What's the problem with that? Well, if we are someone who is working in the office, for example, and we see, we have team members that come in, and the few of them that are coming in when we're coming in, we see them, oh, they work in the office more like I do. They're similar to me. I like these people. And the people that maybe don't as much come in, you're going to start seeing maybe as different to yourself. And maybe you don't give them the same advantages as the people who you happen to see as more similar to yourself. So this can be harmful for the team. This can impede the effectiveness of people individually as well as a group, but also impede people's career progress and personal development. So again, being very aware of this bias and all the biases we've talked about here. Now, we talked about this statistic previously, that older males prefer to be in the office, right? That's what the data tells us. Of course, we also know the data tells us that this is the most represented demographic at senior leadership levels. So what does this tell us for, especially considering the biases we talked about above here, for the probability of really having a successful hybrid work model? If the majority of the leaders are maybe a little bit skewed towards being in favor of in office. So again, something to be aware of in the data. This can tell us how we're going to manage our people and where some of our own biases might come in terms of what the organization needs to be aware of, and as certain groups of leaders need to be aware of. And we don't want to minimize the impact of different leadership demographics on our organization. Of course, leaders can be out of sight, out of mind with some people, just like groups. So again, employees that you're not seeing all the time, don't forget about them. Don't lose track of them. Don't stop mentoring them. Always check in. Make sure they're supported the way they need to be supported. And then inexperienced leaders. We've got to keep that mentorship relationship going with our inexperienced leaders. They may not have developed all the skills to deal with the issues that are coming up, especially in such a rapidly evolving environment. So make sure those mentor relationships are in place. Make sure that the support is there to guide them in their development into becoming the best leaders they can be. Last topic I'm going to cover is about employee well-being. We want to support all employees' well-being. And really, the second pandemic we've dealt with is the burnout pandemic. We see it across every demographic. We see it across multiple types of organizations and work groups. And it's not surprising. I mean, prior to the pandemic, it was costing our economy billions of dollars, and it's just gotten worse. And the stories we hear in so many sectors just continue to reinforce this. So what is burnout? By the WHO recognizes that a syndrome resulting from chronic workplace stress that is not successfully managed. Causes can include things like overwork, role ambiguity, lack of control, low social support, low rewards, dysfunctional work environments, and a lack of personal recovery from work and work-life balance. So the outcomes associated with burnout are numerous, not just employees' health, productivity, turnover rates, you name it, it has a negative implication for every aspect of every organization. How can we beat burnout? We want to have fair and transparent work policies and treat our employees fairly and in a way that makes them feel connected to the organization. So this is really important. People are very sensitive to fairness, and it's important to treat our people fairly and that our policies are fair. Be mindful of overwork in this day and age where people are tethered electronically to their jobs 24/7. We want to be aware of how easy it is for employees to always dip back into the workplace. When do we send those emails? When our projects due? How are we stacking projects on our most productive people so that we don't make them our least productive people? So be mindful of people's overwork. Ensure role clarity. This is especially important in hybrid models where right now the roles are changing. The way people are working is changing. Make sure it's clear to people how they work, the way they're going to work, who they're working with, etc., and they know what's expected of them. Hybrid models should improve autonomy if we let it happen. We give people the autonomy. This is absolutely critical. Autonomy is one of the most important elements of satisfying people's well-being and reducing stress and burnout. Create opportunities for social support. Make sure people can get that in the workplace, as well as have time outside of work to develop their social support networks. Giving people adequate intrinsic and extrinsic rewards. So the extrinsic rewards, the recognition, the pay are important, but also show people empowerment and give them meaningfulness in their job is just as important as well. Having overall healthy work environments and creating boundaries and work-life balance for people is absolutely critical. With that, I wrap up my presentation today. I want to thank you for joining me. Again, I'm John Trougakos, and I'm happy to take questions. I'm happy for anyone that has interest to reach out to me, and we can discuss more at the email listed here on the slide. Thank you very much for your time today.